So in the meantime, welcome all who are here. So nice to see some of you. Cinta and Isia, so good to see you here. Yeah, so start please telling us in the chat where you are connecting from. Okay, I think we are streaming in YouTube. We might not be needed. Anyways, we will see later when we finish. Hola, is in the Netherlands. Marcela from Brazil is here from Spain. And Catherine is in Germany. Oh, Catherine, you're here. In Germany too. Chile, South Africa. Oh, okay. Well, I'm in the Netherlands. It's also Chile. I'm still with my thermic clothes. Oh, Cindy is in Canada. Oh, and Elisa, you're back. So good to see you. Barbara is close to Guy in Vienna. Welcome
I don't
all.
know, maybe we even know each other, Barbara. Your name sounds familiar.
I always think, Gaia, that all the people from Austria that comes to me come from you, from your newsletter.
I don't know if it's true, but I like the thinking.
I always think so.
Yeah.
Yes, Elisa. Looking forward to hear how everything has been. Oh, Barras is common name. Okay, we're waiting a couple more of minutes. Let me just check that no one is having problems in to enter. No, it seems to be all working.
Yes.
Hannah is also from Austria.
Yeah, that's right. I know several has in Austria. Barbara is writing about that. Hi to Linz. Is it cold in the Netherlands? Because here it's really hot.
Yeah, I know. Here it's cold. It's cloudy and it has been quite windy. Yeah, it's not been very nice. Okay, well, I'm gonna start recording because I always otherwise forget. And although I always say that, but lately I've been quite okay. Yes. So we waited a couple of minutes, so now I will just start welcoming you all again. Thank you so much for being in this beautiful class with GAYANNÉE KEDIA. And I think many of you know her already. I think this is the third year, Gaia, that you are here. Before, Gaia they gave a beautiful masterclass about procrastination. But now she has an amazing writing course ready. So please, anyone there struggling with their scientific writing, enjoy the class. And then if you want to work together with Gaia, let her know, because I'm sure that course is amazing. And she will be telling us a bit of the strategies that she also shares in the course. And I love the title of Scientific Writing Made Easy. And we will be learning all about that. And what else? Gaia, do you want to also tell them a bit more about you? Do you have some slides, or do you want to start now?
So for those of you who don't know me, I mean, first, thank you, Anna, so much for inviting me again. And it's always a pleasure to see you again and to see all of you here. So my name is GAYANNÉE KEDIA, but just call me Gaia. I am a researcher in psychology and neuroscience. I've been a researcher for a very long time. And a few years ago, I was always looking for a place to find inspiration and really support actually for writing and being a productive scientist, because I thought it was really not easy for me. And I was looking for it online. And so a couple of years ago, I decided to create it myself because I couldn't find it. And I think that's more or less the same time that we started, Anna. You and I, we started at the same time. Maybe would I have found you before, maybe I would have never started this blog, my blog. No. So it's called brilliantmind.blog. And the course also, yes, and I'm very happy today to talk about one of my favorite topics. It used to be one of my most difficult topics, and with time it's become one of my favorite topics, which is scientific writing. And I called my course, my online course, Scientific Writing Made Easy, because I always had this concept that there must be a method that makes scientific writing easy. And I was looking for a long time also for this method, and then I decided to create it. And the idea of the course is that you really go like, you write your paper from a blank page to a final draft, one little step at a time, without really having to think too much about what you should be doing, just following instructions. And then at the very end, you have it, it's there, it's your paper. And not only it's written, but it also has amazing quality. I will send you in the chat the link to the page if you want to have a look. But first, let's start with this, with my presentation, because today I wanted to share with you some tips about writing that would make writing, scientific writing, way easier and also more enjoyable. Do you see my presentation? Is it working?
Yes, it's working.
Super. Super. So what I want to start telling you when talking about scientific writing is that if you're struggling with writing, welcome to the club. If you're a scientist and you find that writing is really difficult, you're not alone. Every year I meet hundreds of scientists, I work with hundreds of scientists, and most of them, not everybody, once in a while, there is someone who say, oh, I love writing scientific papers, but many people say that they find that very difficult. And I told you I'm a psychologist, I'm a neuroscientist, and from that perspective, it's actually very logical that we find writing difficult because our brains are not made to write. Our brains are made to speak. And if you know a little bit about brain structure, you probably have heard about Wernicke and Broca areas, which are two areas that are dedicated to language. And very naturally, when we come to the world, Anna has 2 boys, I think, yeah? And I'm sure that when your kids came to the world, you started interacting with them, and naturally they were interested in your face, in your voice, because babies have a natural interest for faces and voices. And so you talk to them, and at some point they started making some noises. Maybe they said, bah. And you said, oh, he said, mama, he's so smart. It's way earlier than the normal age written in a book. And then your kid saw that it made you happy by saying something. And so he tried to do it again. And eventually they start speaking, and it comes very easily. And at some point, maybe they speak too much and you wish that they would not ask you all the time for stuff. But oral language comes to us very naturally because it's something that is pre-programmed in our brains. But writing is something totally different. You remember, I mean, your kids, I'm sure, write already, Anna, because they're a bit older. And when you learn to write, your parents put a backpack on your back, and then you go to school, and then they ask you to sit down, they give you a pen, they explain to you how to do it. And I don't know how it works nowadays, but when I was in school, we had to make all these lines with letters and to really learn to connect all the dots so that we will learn to form letters. And that was something that took a very long time, that was very effortful. And actually many kids also struggle with that. It's something that's, for most kids, I think, come quite difficultly. So what is writing? Writing is just a cultural invention. It's a cultural invention in the same way as, I don't know, knitting is a cultural invention, or skiing. I live in Austria. I've been there for 10 years, and I decided that I would try to learn to ski. And I promise you, for me, it feels very much like an Austrian cultural invention. And my brain feels very much like not pre-programmed for that. So it's just a cultural invention. And if you look at the history of humankind, the so-called behaviorally modern humans, Homo sapiens, in other words, you can see that language appeared 50,000 years before Christ, so very long time ago. Agriculture, 11,000 years before Christ. And the oldest remains of writing that have been found are on the Kish tablets. They have been found in Mesopotamia, and it was 3,500 years before Christ. So very late in the history of mankind. And if you look until very recently, you can see that most people were not literate. Most people couldn't read and write. I don't know if you know this website. I find it very interesting. It's called Our World in Data. And you can have all kinds of data. And you can see that, so we have a representation of the literacy rate starting in the 15th century until more or less nowadays. And here we have the Netherlands, Anna, and some of you are from the Netherlands. Here we have Sweden. I think this is France here, United Kingdom, Argentina, Brazil. This is Italy, I think, and this is Germany. And you can see here, this is the representation of literacy rate in the world. And until the beginning of the 20th century, almost most of the world was illiterate, and 20% of the people could read and write. And then this number really increased a lot. But you can see that until very recently, almost nobody could read and write. And here, when we talk about literacy, we're not talking about you have to write a paper that's going to be examined by two very thorough and critical reviewers who are going to try to contest every single sentence that you have written, like we have to do when we write papers, scientific papers. I'm talking about like just reading a simple text and writing a simple text. And indeed, and so that means that scientific writing is just a skill like any other skill that we learn. And like any other skill, what you need when you want to write scientific papers, you need to have the right knowledge. You need to, and then you need to train a lot to gain experience so that your ability grows. And this knowledge, I think a very important part of this knowledge, which we don't really talk so much about, and there are many books about scientific writing, but a lot of these books are about what makes good scientific writing. What are the ingredients that you need when you write a scientific papers? And not so many of these books are going to tell you, what do you do when you write? Like, what is the recipe? You have the ingredients, but you don't necessarily have the recipe to write a good paper. And this process is called the writing process. It describes the series of physical and mental actions that people undertake during the production of a text. And writing a scientific paper, or writing in general, is way more complicated than what they sell you in movies. You know, in movies, you always see that writers sit down in front. I mean, if it's an old movie, it's going to be a typewriter. If it's a more recent movie, it's going to be a laptop. And then they're writing and they write, their fingers move very quickly. And at the end, they have a paper and they send it out and it gets a Pulitzer Prize, and that's it. That's how you write. But in reality, writing is something that is way more complex, especially when you write a scientific paper. Well, you have to do some literature research. You have to find the right papers. You have to read them. You have to take some notes. You have to maybe come up with a first draft and then revise your draft and send it to your co-authors, who are going to send you some feedback that you have to integrate as well. So it's a very complex process. And what I would like to do today is first to ask you, and this is an exercise that I do very often in my workshops. I teach scientific writing workshops, and very often I ask the participants to my workshops, which step of the writing process do you struggle with the most? Like, what do you find? Imagine you have to write tomorrow a paper. What do you do? And what is the difficult part? Like, what is the moment where you feel like, I'm going to stop there, I'm going to do something else because it feels so difficult? And usually the answers that I get are, well, I find it very difficult to get started, like to even start with my paper, because I never really know what should I do. Should I start writing the method section? Should I make an outline? Should I write directly? Should I read more? So many people find very difficult to get started. Many people, that's one of the most frequent answers, also find that it's difficult to find the thread of your paper, and that often they don't really know how they can make their papers logical, that each paragraph follows the next one, is well connected to the previous one, and that it tells an interesting story. Also, many people say that they find really difficult to write this first draft when your page is empty and you have to get something out of it, especially because they tend to be perfectionist. And another aspect of the writing process that many find difficult is to revise. And finally, when you have produced your text, you send it out to your co-authors and you get this avalanche of inputs and you have to integrate it in your text, and it's so difficult. So this is a question I would like to ask you. What are, for you, the difficult steps in the writing process? What do you find difficult? You could mention what's there or something else. Yeah, perfectionism. Oh, that's your thing, Anna. Yeah, finishing, pressing the send button. I can relate to that. The first draft. Okay, you always have new ideas, what you want to add. Yeah, that's a sign of a creative mind. Perfectionism, getting started. Okay, so I see we are many perfectionists in the room. Revising. Yeah, making the boring methodology a bit more salty, yes. The initial search, yes. Okay, getting started. Every sentence, thinking about each word reference. All right, so I realize I'm at the right place. I'm not totally off topic because this is exactly what I would like to talk to you about today. In my presentation, I would like actually to describe to you what are the essential steps of the scientific writing process. What are the steps most people go through? And it doesn't mean that you have to do it exactly in this way, because everybody writes in their own way. And I may be giving you some tips that are going to be absolutely not useful for you. It's not going to work for you because everybody is different. But I think it can be interesting to have some kind of overview of what are the steps that most people undertake. And then I would like to share with you 8 tips to efficiently plan and draft your article, with this idea always like one step at a time, like breaking this big mountain goal of writing a paper with like small steps, so that it feels more easily eatable and reachable. And I will also talk about strategies to overcome perfectionism in writing, because I also know a lot about that. All right. So my first tip would be to not be afraid to start by making a mess. I like to think at the beginning of writing a scientific paper, you know, for me, it's a little bit like when you do this big spring cleaning. You've done all your research. You usually, you have gathered a lot of information, and a bit like in a spring cleaning, at the beginning, you have to take all these things out of your cupboards. I won't lie, I'm not doing spring cleanings all the time. That happens one in a blue moon. But when I do it, I usually start on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday morning. And I don't know, maybe at 11 o'clock after I have taken my breakfast and I'm ready to get started in the day. On Saturdays, I'm not very fast. And then I think like, it's going to take 3-4 hours. And then my house is going to be perfectly clean. And then I put everything out, and usually after 3-4 hours, it's a huge mess, like a bit in this room, like you have stuff everywhere. And this is usually the moment where I'm thinking like, why did I start these things? It's never going to end. And usually at 8 in the evening, I've managed to make it fit. There are maybe still a few boxes that have to be cleaned and finished. And after, I'm usually happy about it because everything feels more livable. And I think the beginning of writing a scientific paper is very similar, because at the beginning, which is called pre-writing, we have all this mass of information. We have literature that we've read, and we've done some literature research. We have our data. I don't know how it is for you, but we usually like do tons of analysis to try to figure our things out. We have also many ideas. Maybe also we have some ideas what is expected from us, what are the guidelines. And it feels very chaotic because we have no idea how we're going to put all that stuff together. And we ask ourselves where we started in the first place. But worry not, my dear fellow scientists, because this is just the first step. And usually what happens in the next step is that we start tidying up. We decide what we want to keep, what we want to discard. And in scientific writing, this step is called planning, where often we try to figure out what we want to say. In my course, for example, we start by figuring out what is the story of our paper, what is the essence of it. Maybe you also make an outline, or you write the skeleton of your paper. I'm going to tell you in a minute what the skeleton of your paper is. But you start figuring out what you want to do, and then you gain clarity regarding what you're going to do with this mass of information. And if you're wondering if this is my bedroom, it's not. My Barbie house is way bigger than this one. So my second tip is to write the skeleton of your paper. What do I mean by writing the skeleton of your paper? Something I never considered, because before I started thinking about scientific writing and working on it myself, was paragraphs. Paragraphs are actually a very interesting aspect of scientific writing. And you can use your paragraphs to really write more efficiently and better. So, and in a way, your paragraph composes the skeleton of your paper. The first thing I want, and I like to think about paragraphs as a scene of your movie. You can really think about your paragraph as the different scenes that unfold the narration of your paper. And in the same way as you could even have one sentence that would describe what each scene in a movie is about, you can think about one sentence that would describe what each paragraph is about. Let's take Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I think most people have watched it, but I always have in my workshop a few interesting people who have never heard about it. Oh, no, they've heard about it, but they haven't watched it. Don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything really bad here. But if you take Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, for example, you have the first scene in which Harry arrives at Hogwarts, and the two other schools also are arriving at Hogwarts, and he discovers who are the people from these two other schools, the students. And then you have the scene in which Dumbledore picks the contestant for the Triwizard Tournament. Then there is the scene where Harry fights the dragon. I'm not going to talk about this scene, because if you've seen it, you know that there's the scene where I should not reveal what's going to happen here. And then you have this final scene that really wraps up the story. So when you write your paper, very much in the same way, you can try to associate each paragraph with one main idea. I find it's a very powerful way to write your paragraphs, asking yourself, what do I want to tell in this one paragraph? And figuring out what is the idea, the main idea of this paragraph, there is one main idea in the scene. So you can really think about your paragraphs, if you write this way, as a succession of ideas. And the first thing that I would advise you, if you write in this way, is to count the number of paragraphs that the sections of your paper should encompass. Let's take, for example, the introduction. You have to write your introduction. Count the number of paragraphs that you should have in your introduction, download a couple of papers published in the journal where you want to submit your paper, and see more or less how many paragraphs they have in the introduction. It's going to vary a lot from journal to journal. If, for example, if you want to publish in Nature or if in Science, you will just have, I don't know, 3-5 paragraphs usually. The format is very short, so you don't have much room, which means, in other words, that you will have 3-5 ideas maximum to make your point in your introduction. In other journals, it's going to be way longer. In one journal in my discipline, I don't know if there are other people in neuroscience or in psychology, but one of the most prestigious journal in psychology, probably most introduction would have at least 15 or 20 paragraphs. So you see, it's a very different format. And what I would like to advise you, and I think it's a very useful rule to follow when writing a paper, is to avoid to revise as much as possible. I mean, revising is hell. Revising is really difficult. Changing a little bit your paper, improving sentences, stuff like that is okay. But having to change a lot the structure of your paper. For example, having to cut your introduction by half is going to be very difficult, because if your paper is well constructed, let's say if your introduction is well constructed, you can't just remove one idea. I mean, you can just like take it out. It would not make any sense, right? It's a bit like you're watching Harry Potter and now they have removed this scene where the Dumbledore select the contestant to the Triwizard tournament. I mean, how do you go from there to there? And it doesn't make any sense, right? So once you have written your paper, you're not going to want to change the structure, because very often what it means is that you will have to rewrite the whole thing. And you already put sweat and maybe tears and blood in your paper. You don't want to go back there. You want to have it as much as possible fixed. So that's a little trick that will help you avoid being in the situation where you have to make major revisions because it's too long. The second thing I want to say about paragraphs is that paragraphs can have a certain structure. And one structure that I find very efficient in scientific writing is point first paragraph structure. I don't know if you're familiar with that. If you've read several books about scientific writing, maybe you've heard about it. The idea of point first paragraph, that's the reason that the name comes from there, is that you start your paragraph with the main idea of the paragraph. So you start with the main point of the paragraph, in other words. And this first sentence is called the topic sentence. Then in the middle of the paragraph, you have what is called the body, and the body can be many different things. It depends also a little bit on your sections. In the introduction, for example, in the body of the paragraph, very often you would have an explanation or a definition. Most paragraphs also will have the presentation of evidence, evidence that supports or develops the main idea with facts, examples, experiments, studies. Often also we comment in our paragraphs. For example, we explain what the evidence means, how it relates to our point, or we compare it to opposing evidence. That may be, for example, in the discussion. Very often in discussion, you're going to compare different ideas, different theories, and your results with previous studies. Or also in the discussion, for example, often we raise implications or limitations to the point that we're trying to make. And what's very elegant and gives a lot of clarity to your writing is to finish your paragraph with a concluding sentence. A concluding sentence can have different functions. Either it outlines the implication of the paragraph, what was the point that you were trying to make, and sometimes the concluding sentence is almost like the same thing as the topic sentence, like a rephrasing of the topic sentence. Or it can also show the development of the paragraph, of the argument. Or what you can do, and I really like that very much, is to link your concluding sentence to the main idea of the next paragraph. It's a bit like you create a little cliffhanger at the end of your paragraph. You make it the Game of Thrones strategy of writing paragraphs, where you finish your paragraph with something that is really intriguing for your audience, so that they want to read the next paragraph. I like, but you cannot abuse of that. I like sometimes to finish my paragraphs with a question, and then people are really interested in having the answer to this question, so they're going to read it in the next paragraph. So you see, point first paragraph structure is something that gives a lot of clarity to your writing. I think people in the US usually know about it, or some know about it. In Europe, not that much, because in Europe, and I can imagine in other parts of the world also, we learn to write in a more logical way, where we first bring the evidence and then we conclude. But this structure is very efficient and it's going to give a lot of clarity. In addition, you can use this structure to fast read, because when articles are written with this structure, by just reading the topic sentence, by just reading the first sentence of the paragraph, you're going to know what the paragraph is about. And you know that very often when we read scientific papers, very fast. And we're trying to avoid to have to read everything because it can be also a bit boring, let's be honest. Or we're just looking for an information and we don't need to read everything. So by just reading the topic sentence of certain papers that are structured in this way, you're going to know exactly what is the narration. You're going to know what each paragraph is about. And if you're looking for certain information about something, you're going to know, oh, it's going to be in this paragraph because this is what the paragraph is about. Or you will see, oh, the introduction is about that. I get it. I don't need to have all the details. And not only is it useful for you to read, but if you write in this way, that's going to make it way easier for your audience also to read your papers. You can also use this structure to write your outline. How can you do that? By just writing the sentence, like creating an outline that encompasses each topic sentence of your paragraph. So first thing, you count the number of paragraphs that you have at your disposal in the introduction. And you know, okay, I have 5 paragraphs for my introduction. And now I'm going to write the topic sentence of each of my paragraph. I'm going to write the main idea of each of my paragraph so that I know what this paragraph is going to be about. If you want to do that, my advice would be write your outline with full sentences and not keywords. So that is sentences with a subject and a verb and not keywords. I'm not such a big fan of keywords in scientific writing because, and I used to do that for a very long time, I would write my paper, my outline with just keywords, and that would look like something like that. So my research topic is self-control. I work on how can we help people to have a better self-discipline. And that could be my introduction, the outline of my introduction. And in the past, that would be something like that. Okay, I'm going to start by talking about literature on self-control, and then I will mention some literature on the methods to improve self-control. Then I will talk about observational learning, etc. I mean, I don't need to give you the details of what all this terminology means, but because it's not so relevant here. But the problem when you write an outline in this way is that you don't really know what you want to make out of it. Let's say you want, okay, I'm going to open talking about self-control, but what do you want to say about it? For example, for me, my opening could be different. I could start by opening and saying self-control is an essential skill for everyday life. That's a typical opening in my film. Or I could say many people lack self-control. Or I could say the world is full of temptations. And that could be 3 openings to one of my paper. But you see, they have different meaning, and I'm going to write different paragraphs if I want to say that self-control is an essential skill, or if I'm starting with the world is full of temptation. I'm going to develop that differently. So if instead of just having bullet points and keywords, I write an actual sentence like this one on the right side of the slide, then I know what I'm going to write afterwards in the paragraph. And that will be way easier to write that paragraph. So you can do that. You can write the topic sentence of each of your paragraphs, and you will know what the paragraph is about. The problem with doing that, and I think for many people it works well, but what may happen sometimes when you do that is that you reach the end of the paragraph and you're wondering, how do I go to the next topic sentence? How do I move on to the next paragraph? And so what you can do instead is write what I call the skeleton of your paper. And the idea of writing the skeleton is that you not only write the topic sentence, but you also write the concluding sentence. So the last sentence of the paragraph. So when you do that, the advantage is that basically you know how your scene is going to start, how it's going to finish, and you just have to fill in the middle, which is usually not the most difficult thing to do. And also you're already thinking about your transitions. How am I going to go from that paragraph to the next one? And you can see if it's logical. My third tip is to check the guidelines before planning the content. What most scientists do when they write a paper is that they write the paper. Usually it takes forever. I mean, depends on how experienced people are. But for example, for young scientists, it can take a very long time. I think it took me, I don't know, several months to write my first paper, like really a long time. And you come up, you have your first draft, and everybody, your co-authors are happy about it. And now comes the question, where are we going to submit it? And if you're a young scientist, probably your supervisors are going to advise you, and they're going to say, oh, let's send it to that journal. And you will go to the journal website, you will read the guidelines for authors, and then you may realize that you will have to change a lot of things because maybe your paper is too long, or you realize that you didn't create the figures in the right way, or you realize that they ask you to add a theoretical contribution section to your introduction. You haven't thought about it. So now you have to change the structure of your introduction. And here again, we fall down in this revising hell where it's really difficult. You have to revise your whole paper and you lose a lot of time. So my advice would be, before you write anything, decide on a journal where you want to go to publish, to submit your paper. And first, read the scope of this journal. Does your research really fall within the scope? I'm telling you that because I've been in many projects where people would send papers to journal and then the journal immediately reject it or reply soon and say, sorry, but we don't publish that kind of research. And it's especially true if you're working on an interdisciplinary project. It's often quite difficult to find a journal that accepts that kind of research. So first read what is the scope of the journal and make sure that your research falls within the scope. And if you're not sure, write to the editor, say, hey, we've done that kind of research. Would that be something for your journal? Then check out what are the formal and informal guidelines. The formal guidelines are those that are written in the guidelines for authors. It's easy to figure out. The informal guidelines are something that you may not necessarily find in the guidelines for authors, but that you will know if you read regularly that journal. For example, in my field, there is a famous journal that almost only publishes multi-study papers. If you want to publish in that journal, you need to have at least 5-6 studies. Sometimes they publish papers with 15 studies. It's a very prestigious journal. So if you want to publish with them, you need to make a big point that your theory has some evidence. But it's not written in their guidelines for authors because once in a while, they're going to publish a paper that will just have one study, but that study is so big, was so complex to pursue. Like they're going to publish a neuroscience paper where they have scanned, I don't know, like thousands of people and they have followed them like over several months or something like that. So something that's really, really intensive. And it's so big that just one paper is enough. It's just one study is enough for the journal. So before you write anything, download a few successful examples and see how they are written, see how they're structured. I didn't do that when I wrote my PhD thesis. Actually, I wrote my PhD thesis. I had never read someone else's PhD thesis. It didn't come to my mind. And I had this concept that my PhD thesis should be a masterpiece, that it should be, I don't know, like I wanted to talk about everything. I was very modest already at that time. And so my PhD thesis was about morality. I investigated the psychological and neural mechanisms of morality, moral judgment. And so you can imagine there has been a lot of things written about morality. Like there is more or less 3,000 or 500 years of people who have written, philosophers who have written about the topic. Then in psychology, there is a lot of research on that. There is a lot of research in neuroscience, also in law. It's really in economics. So it's really a topic that covers almost all fields of science, or social sciences at least. And I wanted to talk about all that stuff. And so I locked myself in my very small apartment in Paris. At the time I was living in Paris, I had an apartment in a very nice neighborhood in the Quartier Latin, in the Latin Quarter in Paris, but it was tiny. It was 20 square meters. And I locked myself 3 months in this mini apartment. I just had one window on a wall, so I didn't see light more or less during 3 months. And I wrote 465 pages to describe everything that I'd done in the field of morality. And I finished it up. I was a zombie. I was like a vampire. But I managed to finish it up and I submitted it. And then I realized that nobody expected me to write that many pages. I mean, in my field, a typical PhD thesis was supposed to be, I don't know, 200 pages. I know some people who have written 150 pages. So it was at least double what I was expected to write. And I think that the people in my committee had a fit when they saw this huge thing coming to them and they were supposed to read it. I know that nowadays, if I had to review a PhD thesis that would be that long, I would hate the person who made me read all these pages. And I know that one of the person in my committee didn't ever read it because I know that from one of her students, she told it to me. So you don't have to do the same thing. You don't have to commit the same mistakes. Make sure what is expected from you. Ask yourself, what are the reviewers? What are the readers? What do they expect from you? What do they care about? And give them exactly that. My next tip would be to write out loud. I told you at the beginning of this presentation that our brains are not made to write, but our brains are made to speak. And very often when we communicate with someone, when we explain something to someone, we can gain a lot of clarity. So if you're stuck somewhere, take your phone, try to go in nature because there is a lot of research in psychology that shows that it's very good for the mind. If you don't have any nature close by, I don't know, maybe go to a park or just walk in the street. That also does the trick. And imagine that you're writing your abstract and that you're telling your abstract to someone or your introduction. What do you want to tell them? And record yourself. I do that. I pretend I'm on the phone so that I don't look too mental in case I meet someone. And record yourself and you will see that it's a great way to get unstuck. And recently on the blog, we have written several blog posts about daily rituals from scientists. And that's really interesting because many scientists used to walk a lot. We wrote a post about Darwin, Einstein, and B.F. Skinners, and all three would spend like hours every day really walking, probably to clarify their mind. Okay, so the next tip is to get feedback early on. Very often what happens when we write is that we want to write this first draft and we put a lot of effort in having a great first draft. And often it takes weeks, months, and then we send it to, I don't know, our supervisor, if we have a supervisor or co-authors, and then they come and they bring you like a ton of changes that you have to do about the structure, about the concept, and you should talk about this, and you should change that, and blah, blah, blah. And so you have to integrate all these things to your narration, which is very difficult and takes a lot of time. And then we do all this back and forth that takes forever. My advice would be get feedback at the level of your outline, at the level of your content. So if you work on your story, if you create an outline or the skeleton of your paper, before you write anything, before you have put too much time into it, meet with at least your main co-author and discuss the content and ask them some feedback about the content. Does it make sense? Is it logical? Did I forget something? Should I add something else? And then rework a little bit the skeleton or this outline with them. And then when you agree on the content, then draft the whole thing. Then put in the effort to draft everything. I work with that also if you have students. I do that with my students. I always ask them to come to me with an outline and we work on that. And I love it because I don't have to read these very long drafts that are very chaotic. I can just focus on the content at that level. My next tip is to let the work sit. Very often when we write, we cannot see anymore what we have written because it's so close. We don't see it anymore. When I wrote my PhD thesis, one thing I was absolutely obsessed with was to have a good opening, like that my introduction would be interesting because I wanted people to read it and to be taken by the story and by the research. So I spent a lot of time revising this introduction. And then at the last minute, obviously at the time I was doing everything at the last minute. At the last minute, I went to the printing shop. I remember it was Thursday afternoon. I had to give my thesis. I was in Paris and I had to fly to Toulouse to hand in my thesis on Friday. And so it was Thursday, 5 o'clock. The printing shop was closing at 7 o'clock. And at 5 o'clock, I go to the printing shop. I give them my USB stick. I say, please print my thesis. And I remember I was totally exhausted. I was sitting on the floor of that printing shop waiting that he brings me the thesis. And then he comes and he hands it to me and I get it, and then I have it in my hand, and I'm just like, oh, it's there. And I open it, and the angels start singing, and lights come out the document, and I'm just like, oh, I've made it. And I read the first sentence of the introduction, and there it is, a typo on the first sentence of the introduction. I was just like, no. And I could see all the other theses like being printed on the machine next to it. So it was a little bit frustrating. Yeah? But that's just how it is. So we cannot see our writing anymore. So when you have drafted your first draft, like put it away, forget about it for at least a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks. And then you're going to read it and you will see it as if someone else had written it, and everything will feel, you will see exactly what you have to change. Okay, my next tip is to edit and proofread at the end. Very often we want our draft to look very pretty and to be perfect. So we put a lot of effort in having the references right, and do like focusing on good expression and language and all the formal aspects in the early drafts when we send it to our co-authors. And in my view, it's a lot of lost time because you're going to change a lot. Like between the first draft and the last draft, a lot is going to be changed. Sometimes whole paragraphs are going to disappear. And so all this fine-tuning that you're doing at early stages is going to be for nothing, because anyway, you're going to have to do it at the very end. And you will probably have to redo everything. So at the first stages of your draft, don't put too much energy into that. It doesn't really matter if your references is perfect, if you have the comma where it is, if all the details are perfect, you can focus on that at the end. You can work on a bit rougher draft at first. Okay, and my last tip is to focus on one process at a time. You see, here is the full representation of the writing process with all the different steps we went through. And you can already notice that some of these steps are in nature very different from others. Some of these steps require technical skills. If you have a good process, it's not very complicated to do a good literature research or to analyze your data or to read the guidelines of the paper. That's actually really a technical skill. But other steps require you to be creative. You have to produce something. You have to take something out of your mind and put it on the paper. And what very often happens at that stage is that, let's say, for example, you want to write the first sentence of your introduction. It's always a lot of pressure because you want it to be really good. So you're about to write your first sentence of your introduction, and a sentence starts forming in your mind. And before it even had time to form fully, the critical thinking comes and push it back and say, no, it's not good enough. Oh, it's in a passive voice. I've learned from Anna, you should not write passive sentences. Or it's too long, or it's like this or like that. And so you have a bit two contrary movements that happen. You have the creativity, a bit like a chick that wants to get out of the egg, but each time it puts its head out, then the critical thinking comes and push it back in the egg. And that's something that's very stressful. That's something that's very unproductive as well, because this is not how productivity works. Creativity happens when we're free, when everything can happen the way it happens. So my advice would be to separate these processes. When you have to be creative, allow everything that wants to come out in the form it wants to come out. If you want to mix up languages, fair enough. If it's passive sentences, fair enough. If it's ugly, if it doesn't sound good, we don't care about it. At that stage, this is what you have to do. And then you look at it, and then you can see what you can do to improve it. In other words, as the good Ernest used to say, the first draft of anything is shit. Allow your first draft to be really bad. It's just a first draft. It's just your way to figure out what you want to say. And you're going to work on it. You're going to revise it. You're going to make it better. But at least you will have some material to work on. So that's what I wanted to tell you. I wanted to describe this writing process and the different steps, and finish with this note for perfectionists. Guys, I give you my blessing. I'm sure Hannah joins me to write really shitty drafts. My first draft are really bad, and I really have the impression usually that a 7-year-old would do a better job, and I have this voice in my mind that always says, GAYANNÉE, you're teaching scientific writing and you write so bad drafts. But eventually I'm happy about the result, and I know that it's just a first step. So that's all the tips I wanted to share with you here. I would love it if maybe you could write in the chat if there is something that you could take with you. Probably not integrate everything in your writing process. I mean, they are all in the course. All these different tips are integrated in the course. But now, if you want to try it in your own draft, maybe you don't need to do everything at once. But maybe there is one thing that you think would be helpful for you, either from all these tips or from something that I've said. And I always think that, I mean, I'm happy if you found this presentation interesting. I hope that you found it interesting and useful in the first place. But usually it's not enough. You need to decide to take action, because just being inspired, you're probably going to forget about it. So is there anything in all these tips that you could take with you? And I would love it if you would write it in the chat. That would be also interesting for me. Yeah. So Elaine is writing that she's shocked that so many years of education without getting proper training. That's so true. I don't understand it, frankly, but I agree with you. All right, focus on one process at a time. Yeah.
This
Yeah,
is
I mean,
very nice, Gaia.
Yeah, Rebecca is writing that she uses a different technique. I mean, just see if that works for you. Again, I really see all these tips as some way of trying things out, and you see, oh, that's helpful or not so helpful. Yeah, and I just want to finish by thanking you for attending this masterclass, and I'm very happy to answer any question if you have questions.
Thank you, Gaia. It was so nice, and it's amazing. Like, I teach also these things, and I still always learn something new. I really like this idea of writing the last paragraph when we make the outline. So something I always, it was start the first one, even when maybe it wasn't the final topic sentence, and then some keywords of what I wanted to share. But I never wrote the last one. I always thought the last one will come later.
Yeah.
But I love what you said, and I'm a big fan lately of what I call it leaving tasks for our unconscious brain. So I think by doing that, just forcing yourself to also write the last one, you can then leave the task to that unconscious brain of writing the rest of the paragraph, right? Like you already have thought the beginning and the end, and then you can go and do your life and let that brain build up the rest.
Yeah, I never thought about it this way, but that's true. Yeah.
I love it. I'm going to try more.
Super.
It was so good. In the meantime, there are questions coming. Let me see.
I see there are a few questions.
Diana has one. Do you think is it possible to start writing if I'm still analyzing my data? What would you say, Gaia?
Actually, my approach to that is start as soon as possible. So the things that I gave you here, actually, we do it before we even collect the data, before we even create our studies. Because especially writing the introduction, the discussion, the abstract, I find it's very useful to start really thinking about all these things very early on, especially your story. Because while doing it, you will realize you will come with new ideas and you will have to fine-tune your reasoning. I mean, that's what's so interesting about writing is that it's not just a way to communicate with others, it's how we start really thinking deeply about our research. So I like, and with my students, we work very early on writing. I ask my students even to write the abstract. So we start with writing the abstract and then the introduction and the methods, like as we are planning the study. And if you're already collecting the data, absolutely do that. Also, I feel like, this idea, like, I mean, it depends probably on people. Maybe some people like to, focus on writing and just do that for a couple of weeks I find that it requires a lot of concentration, and I personally like implementing it in my everyday life. So usually I try to use my first 2 hours of the day to write, and then I do the easiest work. And so if you start very early on, you're going to really love yourself, because when you will have your results, you will already have written quite a bit, and it's not going to feel like this huge mountain. Now I have to write the whole paper. But also it's not going to be that much before. So absolutely, yeah. At least up to the discussion, up to the methods. And it could be that you're going to change it a little bit. That's okay. But it will have anyway helped you a lot in your thinking.
This is so good. I just want to add to what Gaia said. I totally agree, Gaia, and I always say start writing now. So if anyone here hasn't started writing, please, as we hang up, just open a document and start writing some ideas. Start working on that shitty first draft. And I love what you said, Gaia, that it's a way of communicating with others, but also communicating with yourself. And there is a quote, I don't remember who said it, but I love it, that first we learn to write and then we write to learn. So I always tell my students, when you feel like a bit blocked, you don't know how to go, you feel confused, write. Messy writing, because by putting those ideas into words, you start getting clarity. It's really fascinating how helpful it is to get clarity. And then I get a lot of resistance. The students often tell me, but it's a waste of time, because then if the results are different, I might need to rewrite. And I would say it's never a waste of time, because you're not gonna, like you said, you won't change it radically. And your writing skills keep improving and making your life easier. So absolutely. Only good stuff of starting early.
So I think there are other questions. Yeah.
Yeah, Julia had also a good one. At what part of the mess do you actually start to write?
Yeah, so I actually feel that writing is part of organizing the mess. During the mess, also something that's very messy is often doing the literature research, because can be very confusing, and many people, when they do literature research, end up having 50 tabs open and wondering, what do I do with all this information, because you've clicked on one paper to the next paper to so that can be also quite messy, and there you will need to write to take some notes. So I see that as something a little bit different. I mean, the way I do that in my own research is that I ask myself questions, and I try to use I ask the literature questions, and I write down what I found for answers. So that's one way to organize that mess. And then I find that creating outlines really is a very good way to organize the mess. And I mean, I'm sure that if people have been in your course, Anna, you have talked about that. But the good news is that usually in scientific papers, in academic papers, there is a clear logic, what comes where. And really you can in advance know, okay, I start with this and then I do this, and I'm going to talk about that. And if you know that, if you know all these different steps, then you know what you should put where, and while figuring that out, you will find your thread. I hope that answered the question. I don't know, what do you think, Anna?
Yes, I love that. The only thing I would add, because I was today in a private call with one of our students writing grant proposal, right? And usually when you are writing an experimental paper that you have done the experiments, you know the data, I always say, like, you know your things, you know your stuff at the moment of writing. And I think you are quite ready to start writing more structure, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Versus when you write a literature review, a review paper, a grant, then you need to do more reading, right? More thinking, and then that mess will be bigger, probably,
Yeah.
right? As part of that
Oh, yeah.
thinking.
The ultra mess, yeah.
Yes, that would be a huge mess. But in any case, both situations, I always say, I'm obsessed with starting with that paragraph where you have the main objective of the study is, and my research questions are. So what I always say is try to figure it out as early as possible, that paragraph. Of course, you might need to read more, you might need to write more messy text, but try to find that soon, get clear, write that as soon as possible, and then from that, start getting structure with the out. Once you have that, everything will come. But yeah, just adding something. There was another question, Gaia, it was a bit higher, so just to be sure we don't miss it, from Christine. How do you manage co-authors that are less accepting of bad first drafts?
So I don't
see great questions.
Yeah. So for me, the bad first draft is just something for you. Because nobody should read your bad first draft, you know? I mean, if it's really, really bad, because it's so complicated. I mean, if it's really bad, people are not going to understand what you mean. So I see the first draft as something that you just write for you once you have figured out what you want to say. Then you draft your first draft. Usually I think about it as you put it out of your system. It's a little bit of an ugly process, you know, like, but you scroll through your first draft, you have it out, you put it aside, and then you go through it, you revise it for yourself, you try to make it better. I find usually it's nice. I typically would revise my drafts maybe twice. Like I would read it once, improve it, improve the style. I would put it away again. I would read it a second time, improve a little bit the style after having put it away for a couple of days. And then usually it's in a state that is acceptable to have a first feedback from someone. So that's how I would do it.
I can also add something, like, I feel annoyed when I receive drafts that are full of notes. So I would say, don't do that when you are sharing with someone. And also, I also not feel annoyed, but if there are a lot of grammar mistakes, my attention goes to them. And then it's a loss of my energy for you. Right? So be sure you pass your draft through Grammarly. Nowadays, maybe ChatGPT. Be sure that there are no grammar mistakes. So the co-authors can focus on the science.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now we have the questions that come a bit later. So Aileen says, do you have any methodology to write the discussion section? I never know how to start. I normally go back to the literature and back to the paper, but I feel the process is messy. And procrastinate because I feel it's difficult.
I get this question a lot because I think the discussion is one of the most difficult sections. Like introduction discussion is usually the two difficult sections to write. And so I would like to say two things. First, discussions follow a certain structure. we don't really have time now to go through that structure, but they usually they start narrow, they broaden up, and they follow a very specific structure. You will find also on my blog resources. I've written a whole post about how to structure your discussion. Maybe you can have a look at that if you're interested. And the main point of the discussion should be about the implications, like what do we learn from that research? And I know that it's sometimes a little bit tricky because also sometimes studies are not really straightforward. Sometimes you had like one hypothesis that worked, the second not so much. But really the goal of the discussion is people, you have done this research, what have you learned? What is interesting for your readers that they can learn from your paper and from your research? And this is something you need to think about yourself. The second goal of the discussion is what Paul Sivia, you probably know Paul Sivia, and he's written very good books about scientific writing, and he calls that the ignoble goal of the discussion. I like this expression very much, where we talk about limitations and problems and things like that. And you often talk about that in the discussion, but it should not take too much room. The discussion is not the place where you're rolling in the mud and saying everything that you did wrong or you could have done better. Because first, that's often not true. I mean, very often in the discussion, you needed to do the research to know that this was not going to work, you know what I mean? I mean, the research was not even if certain things are limited, you need to, the limitations have to be accepted because every research has some limitation. And even if there are some problems, even if there were some things, some hypotheses that were not confirmed, you needed to do the research in order to come there. So don't make it all about your limitations. No way. Like, focus first on the implication, how the research solved the problem, what it brings to that question that you focus your research on. Talk a little bit about your limitations if you have to, and then finish up with the take-home message. But I would advise you to go a little bit more deeper into the structure also of the discussion. You will see that there is a lot to learn there.
Thank you, GAYANNÉE. I just found the post. For everyone, I've shared the link to that post from GAYANNÉE in the chat. If you want to have a look, actually, you all should have a look. And just to add something, I love that you say that because of course, probably that happens to you too, right? Like most of the people who want come to work with us, often they have results that they don't like, that they didn't expect, that are messy, that are full of variation. They feel a bit discouraged, demotivated, right? I had that. I think I never found what I expected. Never, ever.
Me neither.
Never, ever. So often I was highly disappointed and sad about the results. And writing those papers is hard, but you need to do it, okay? And that's something that now I encourage all my students, like, focus on what you have found, not what you haven't found and why you haven't found and what were the reasons and what could you do different. And no, focus, what have you found? What is it well done? What have you found, even if the result is that there is no effect? And what does that mean? And because also when we read these papers all about limitations, like you say, it's like boring. It's like, oh, these people didn't find anything. Yeah, probably they did, but they don't speak about it, right? So we need to speak about what we have found.
For me, okay, I know that null results are always a little bit difficult to interpret, but if something doesn't work and you had a good reason, usually you had a good reason to think that it would work, right? And now it doesn't work, that's interesting. Maybe someone is going to come and have the same idea and they're going to benefit from you having already done that research. And for the people working in that field, that's also interesting. We know that there are that a lot of science doesn't replicate. Why? Because people are trying to write these perfect papers where the interactions looks like that, and and all these things, and it's just not how it is, and it's not serving the goal of science. And also, I must say, with time, I have a bit less pressure now to publish because I'm not dependent on that for my survival. But I must say that I also like it very much when something doesn't work, because I'm just like, oh, I have now to think about it, oh, that's interesting. That's breaking one of my concepts. And that's how we learn. We learn from things that don't work. If it works, we don't learn anything. We just learn that
super
we are
exciting.
right.
And and also now when I see papers where they found what they expected, I thought, how do they do that? I become a bit
don't believe in
suspicious.
it.
I don't believe it. Or they have changed the hypothesis. How is
Yeah.
that happening? And I find it
Yeah.
even sometimes like, well, they found what they expected. A bit boring,
Yeah.
right? With excitement. So,
Absolutely.
no, but this is really nice. Love it. We have one more question. Let me see.
So I see
Yeah,
this
what about
question.
if they, yes.
Yeah. Read it, please, Anna.
What about if the journal is not selected? Can you still write a draft with general structure and then use the paragraphs to adapt to the journal guidelines?
Sure. Sure, but know that you may have to make some changes. Huh? Yeah.
Something that I always share is at least, if not the target journal, I always say at least the category. For example, in my field, we will have journals on the category of plant science or journals on category of entomology or soil sciences, right? So at least say, okay, I want to submit to this category, and then I might change the journal, because also the focus of the paper might change depending on the category. And I think inside one category, probably what Gaia was mentioning about that structure is quite similar, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. There is a bit like a typical blueprint for journals within one category. That's right.
Within one category, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There
yeah.
is also a question from Sabrina.
Yeah.
Should I read it?
Yeah,
I find it
please.
still difficult to judge how much time I need to plan to write something, often being slower than anticipated. Any advice? I love this question too.
What, Sabrina? I'm so surprised about that comment. No, I'm joking. I think it's almost, so I'm going to tell you the truth. Like, I've been obsessed about trying to be able to set writing goals for the last 10 years. Like, that's been my graal, you know. And I'm going to tell you what is my solution to that. I mean, so first, don't be too precise about that, because I think it's really difficult. Second, and that's my answer. In my view, okay, no, I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer is that I think, for example, my course, and I'm sure that Anna's course also is the same thing. By breaking the big goals into small steps, that's way easier to set some goals, to set some writing goals. Huh? Because like just like giving yourself the goal to write the introduction, that's just like, oh, wow, that's, I don't know how much time it takes to write an introduction. But for example, in my course, I have workbooks that will really help you determine what you want to write at each level of your introduction or of your discussion. And you see there is a question, and you can say, okay, that question I can answer in that much time. So that makes it way easier to set some writing goals. My second answer would be track how much time you need to write your paper. And that was almost impossible to do. That was very difficult to do, because I've been trying to do that for a very long time. And I didn't know how to track my writing time. So I created a scientific writing tracker, and it's basically an Excel sheet. I'm sending you the link to, so it's in my toolbox on the blog. I have a toolbox, and in this toolbox, you're going to find the scientific writing tracker. And the idea is it's an Excel table for each month, so you can really see how much time you spend each month writing each section of your paper, how many words, at what time. I mean, it's quite a detailed but easy to use table. And if you use it for one of your paper, then you will know how much time it took you to write the previous paper, to draft your introduction, to revise your introduction. So you can really separate all these different steps in the writing tracker. At the end, you have a representation of like graphs, diagrams to see all these different things. And I think that's a good strategy to have at least a vague idea of how much time it takes. Do you have a better answer, Anna, than this one? Maybe you have something
Well, first, that several of my students were also using your tracker and they
Yeah.
loved it. We are, I'm also, I love to see, and I was like, and does it have figures? Yeah, it gives you a figure with how it is. And I'm like, oh my God. So it's, everyone get the tracker because I think it's really great. So in general, because this is the thing, I hope you all have realized also from Gaia has said, if you follow me and you have heard me, writing skills are not enough, right? We also need to learn time management skills. We need to learn mindset growth skills and put them all together, right? Because like perfectionist time management come into place. That to start. And then I always say, like, estimate how much time something is going to take you based on your experience, right? When you are doing a PhD, you have written a master thesis, you know more or less, right? So estimate and then double the time. Because things take
at
always
least.
twice as long, at least. That to
Yeah.
start. And also, yes, they did this study in terms of planning and weekly planning, and they saw that when nobody finished everything that they planned for the week, okay? Nobody in the study. But in 2 weeks, 80% of the stuff were finished. So
Yeah.
just
I love
assume,
that.
accept, things are not going to be finished in 1 week,
Yeah.
but if you keep planning and you keep working, in 2 weeks they will. So when we also combine that with the doubling, kind of makes it happen.
Absolutely.
And yeah, the last thing is that my estimate is that as average, if you already have your data analyzed, you know your data, they're analyzed, preliminary figures are done, what is the writing itself? I estimate 5 weeks full time for having a first finished draft.
Okay.
I say it's average, sometimes depending on your experience, how difficult the paper is, if it's a new topic or you already have written about it, it can be faster, it can be slower. And of course, this is estimating that you just write, right? Like Gaia was saying, you just lock yourself in that small apartment, become a zombie, and just write. That's kind of the estimate. But if you say, no, I only can work in the mornings, or I only work 1 day a week, well, then calculate more or less.
Yeah.
And that
And I
kind
want to
of,
say also, sorry, go ahead. Anna.
No, that those kind of guidelines, then in my experience, brings us quite close to an estimate.
Yeah. And I want to say, you know, it's okay also to take time. I must say that I used to feel really bad about taking time. And now I give myself almost a luxury sometimes, you know, to take time, not in the sense that I procrastinate, but in the sense that I know that I'm a perfectionist. I want to do a good job. And that's often the reason why it takes me some time. I know that often I'm satisfied in the end if I take enough time. And that's also, I mean, we're talking about perfectionism. I've learned to like that side of me because I think because I want to create something that is good, that is useful. And I think it's great. I think actually many people who have brought good things in the world were perfectionists, probably all of them, because you have to always try to improve what you want to do. And it's also okay, you know, enjoy. I don't know, for example, reading literature takes forever. It takes so much time. And if you always think like, oh, I have to be faster, you're going to hate it. But now if you think like, I really want to understand what it's about, and I'm going to give myself this luxury to do that, it's actually fun. I mean, no, it's not always fun because some papers are really badly written. But it's interesting. The process of understanding, for example, the things in your field of thinking about these ideas is great. I mean, that's the reason why we do that, right? Is because we love that process. Huh? So allow also yourself to do that.
That's so nice. Yes. Thanks so much, Gaia. I think we came to all the questions. If we are missing any question, just pop it quickly there. And
yeah,
you're welcome, Sabrina.
I think we're good. Yes.
Yes, if there are no more questions, I want to thank you once again for being here, and also for the ones who watch the replay. Some people already asked me for that. Thank you for being here. And Diana says, how can we take the course? Oh, Gaia, can you drop your website again?
Yes,
so
sure.
Gaia has...
Sure. So I can send you the link to the online course, because the online course is very much the essence of that, but on steroid kind of, where we really made every single step very easy for you, so that you just have to follow all the different steps. I think this is also a good resource if you don't have very long sessions to write. Sometimes often people say like, I don't have enough time to write. I just have half an hour here or an hour there. And the course is really made for you to be able to nevertheless write your paper. You will see there are videos at the beginning of each module of each section. You will have a video to explain to you how to write this section, a quiz, and then a workbook that really guides you through the writing. So I've sent the link to the course in the chat. You can have a look at it.
It's amazing. And then for anyone who is watching the replay, I will also put that link in the email with the replay. So with this, just to remind you, we do here in Advocacy Right, I try to have some of these amazing guests like Gaia, not guests every month, but almost every month, or is one of guest webinar, or I do one of my own classes. So if you are new to us, please keep joining us. If those of you who already work with us, have been here for a while, thank you so much for keep showing up. Please, a reminder that
thank you so much to you, Anna,
helps.
for organizing all this.
Oh, no, my
bringing all
pleasure.
these people together. It's really fantastic.
It's so nice. So I also want to ask all of you to please share Gaia's work, share my work, ask people to join our free classes, our courses. It means a lot, and is a way that we can keep doing this. And Gaia sends some emails. I also send a lot of emails. We both do email marketing, and that's also how the business works. And I want to also ask you all, please do not mark our emails as spam. You can always unsubscribe at the bottom. There is a link. Do that, because I don't know, Gaia, if you had this, but I've had a lot of problems lately that people mark me as spam, and then in Gmail at some point, they start blocking completely our emails to anyone using Gmail. So please be sure, if you want to unsubscribe, there is always a link at the bottom. And it's not a problem. You just do that. It's very easy. But don't mark it as the spam, please. And with this, oh, look, Rebecca is keen to start writing.
Rebecca,
yes,
good
so
luck.
good.
Yeah, and thanks for all your nice comments
in
the chat. It's a pleasure.
That's the best that each of you can do, even if it's 10 minutes when we hang up, open a document and start writing. And then continue day after day. Amazing. And we are here for any questions. You can always email us. And yeah, we love to hear also from you. If you have implemented any of the tips of Gaia or anything I've shared, and if it works for you, let us know.
Yes, definitely.
Now with this,
bye-bye. I'm sorry, I have to leave.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks so much, Gaia, for staying all this long. It's been so fun.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
We should meet again also, Anna.
Yes, we will find a...
Let's write and find a time. Okay?
We do that. Yes.
Bye-bye. Bye to everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye to everyone. Thank you.